recorded a question. Good evening and hello everybody. It is so nice to see so many familiar faces and welcome to everyone that is joining us this evening for our first Geography of Hope of 2022. My name is Monica Shear. For those of you that have not had an opportunity to meet me on one of these programs yet, I'm the Director of Outreach here at Alaska Wilderness League, and I'm coming to you from the Southeast Pennsylvania area, which are the traditional territories of the Lenape peoples. Just like to say, if you're joining us and able to use the chat and want to share where you're from, please feel free to do that as well. It's always great to see how far people are joining us during these programs. So tonight, very excitingly, we kick off our 4th season of Geography of Hope. And I'm very excited for this season. In early February, I'll tease out a few that we have upcoming before I get into tonight's program. But in early February, we're going to be joined by nature photographer Stephen Kozlowski. And you probably will recognize some of his photos of polar bears from our alerts and our website. Then in late February, we're going to have a special members only event with George DeVoke, who's a scientist, a researcher, and founder of Friends of Cooper Island. George has run a continuous study of seabirds in Arctic Alaska, and since its finding on the consequences of snow and sea ice, it really, this decades-long study provides some of the best examples of the biological consequences of climate change. So if you're not currently a member of Alaska Wilderness League, please consider joining today so you don't miss out on that program. And then following George in March, I'm really excited to share that we're going to be joined by Princess Dottie Johnson, a former executive director of the Gwich'in Steering Committee, and now is the current creative producer of the wonderful kids program that I hope many of you know, Molly of Denali. She also has a short film coming out that she will be speaking about. And her and I are going to discuss inclusion and representation and how storytelling can really help share out Indigenous values and the ways that we all interact with our planet and animal relatives of the land and water that we all do depend on. There are a few more programs following that, but just as a little teaser for what we've got coming up for you guys this year. And then just before I introduce our speaker for tonight, a few housekeeping items to help assure you get the best experience from the program. As you can already likely tell, everyone is muted for the duration of the program. That's really just to help make sure everyone can have the best listening experience. We will be doing a question and answer period, due for all of these. Seth did mention he is happy to field questions at any point throughout the program. So please feel free to use the chat at any time. And I'll be making sure to convey those questions to Seth both during the program and for the opportunity for him and I to do a Q&A afterwards. Also, as you may have heard, tonight's program is being recorded in its entirety. We will be sending out an email to all of you tomorrow, and that will include a link to the recording in case you miss any or have to jump off early. It will also include any links that we might be sharing in the chat tonight, so you don't have to worry about copying those down. They will all come in an email to you tomorrow, so you can check out some of the additional materials and resources that we will be sharing with you. And with that, I really have a great honor and pleasure to introduce Seth Kantner, a commercial fisherman, writer, and wildlife photographer. He was born and raised in northern Alaska, and his art reflects his love for this land and the animals who live on it, and truly his belief in the importance of that wilderness be left wild. In 2004, his debut novel, Ordinary Wolves, was released to literary acclaim, and tonight we have him joining us to present his newly published book, A Thousand Trails Home, which is a wonderful read, and I hope many of you will pick up a copy after you get to hear his accounts tonight. It's a firsthand account of his time spent hunting, studying, and living alongside the caribou. And the book really encompasses the historical past and present day and the fragilely intertwined lives of the people and animals surviving in Alaskan Arctic. And Seth really illuminates the critical story about the interconnectedness of the Iñupiat of Northwest Alaska, the Western Arctic caribou herd, and the Arctic region as a whole. So, again, kind of our theme running this year is going to be how all these intact wilderness ecosystems are really experiencing some effects from climate change and what we're able to do and learn from those. And so with that, and no further ado, I'd like to introduce and turn it over to our featured speaker, Seth.
Thank you, Monica and Hillary, for contacting me, I guess, and in the Alaska Wilderness League. I need to apologize first. I'm in Hawaii visiting my parents on their little subsistence farm here, and I tried to put a shirt on, but I started getting cooked, and figured I better not pass out on you guys. This book, I just finished it. Took about 10 years of writing it, which included a lot of beating around in the willows, trying to figure out what I wanted to say about this life and caribou and how we fit together, and probably 30 years of photographing. And I didn't expect it to come out very well, but it's better than I better than I expected, as far as trying to glue so many trails of my life and history and caribou, and then climate change. And I had a lot I wanted to say, and I think the original contract with Mountaineers Books was 20,000 words, and I ended up at 72,000 or something. So I kind of overdid it. But let me read the prologue here at the beginning, and then show some slides of caribou to get you in the country. Caribou in the night. Barefoot in the darkness on thin fall snow, I stop walking. My feet will be freezing soon, and I'm only here to listen. 40 steps behind is the small yellow glow of lamplight coming from the window in my sod home. Inside, I have hardwood steaming for runners for a dog sled, and I need to get back in to make sure the water doesn't boil dry. Above the branches and brush, the stars are sharp, and a thin fingernail moon offers little luminescence. From the north comes a cold breeze, hardly more than a stir. The aurora is weak too, faint green smoke up against the stars, and not enough to light the night. Ice pans far out in the river make soft roars as they collide with heaped fast ice, tinkling and then spinning silently on their way west. My feet are feeling the cold. South across the dark river floats the comments of a longtime companion, a great horned owl. From down the ridge comes the rattle of chains and a few whimpers and whines. My dog team pacing in circles, restless in the rich smelling darkness. They too are likely holding freezing pads up off the snow, one at a time to thaw, while they focus their ears north. For once, I'm not out checking on the team. I'm not trying to dissuade a middle of the night grizzly bear from borrowing my meat. I'm only listening. From the north, the night slowly fills with soft sounds, many feet moving through snow and the low, wiry brush of frozen tundra. the click of hoof tendons, an occasional grunt, and the clatter of antlers sweeping dwarf birch and alder branches. Caribou are passing in the night. Big and small herds have come through for nearly 2 months now. It's only the last 3 days since the river began running heavier ice that this uninterrupted line of animals has been marching east. In truth, caribou have been passing my entire life. The land is veined with their ancient trails. But something is different tonight. There's something big and dark and wild about standing barefoot on thin snow and frozen ground, hearing thousands of animals traveling through and not being able to see even one. It's exciting and humbling, shivery and on the edge of scary, as if some huge parallel nation is on the move out under the starlight. Now my feet have frozen patches. I'm suddenly cognizant of the pinch and burn, and I hurry back towards the small yellow glow, a lone light in this world of darkness. Inside, on my family's old bearskin couch, I sit and feel the twin aches of skin thawing and of love for my home, this land of caribou. So I broke this book up into 4 sections, the first being fall. And in my life, they're born and raised in Old Igloo on the Kobuk River. We gathered from everything from the land, or nearly everything. And so the year starting January 1st on the calendar made no sense to us. And it started in our mind, it started in the fall when you started, putting fish away for dog food for the winter, and caribou and berries, and cutting moss to insulate the igloo. So that's the way I set this book up. I'm going to press a button here and hope it's not the wrong one, and switch over to some slides. Monica, you tell me if I'm doing this right, please.
You are doing it right. Yep, we are seeing your slides.
Okay, so there's a play button across the top, and it's hidden by a menu bar. Any idea how I would get to that?
Is it the faces?
I could see the word play, but this menu bar, I would like to move away. I'll try. Here we go. I got it to move. Okay.
Awesome. Perfect.
On your screen, are the caribou moving?
Yes.
Thank you. So this is the Kokolik north of the Brooks Range in mid-June, directly after the caribou have a Western Arctic herd has a mass birthing of basically in 4 or 5 or 6 days. Nearly all the female caribou have children right there on sort of protective device to all have kids at the same time, so the bears and wolves and eagles can only eat so many. I'm going to see if I can get this to play one more time. If you watch here on the flat tundra a little bit in the center, a little bit to the left, you'll see a cow running back against this river of caribou. So when you're standing on a mountain up there, you can see caribou stretching across the tundra for miles and miles and miles in each direction, sort of a ribbon of caribou. And if you watch that ribbon throughout here and there, you see caribou running back, and those are cows going back to look for their children. So it's organized, but sort of pandemonium at the same time. And if you go down this river in a kayak or a canoe, or you'll see a white line along the shores, which is looks like high water line, but it's actually caribou hair. There's so many caribou crossing the river that they leave this so-called hairline. So all this is part of being around this herd of the Western Arctic herd, which was close to 500,000 caribou in my lifetime, and now is dropping rapidly. possibly from climate change and other things. This is the country I grew up in. You can see the Jade Mountains in the background, fall time, tundra, caribou herds coming, which in my lifetime we counted on probably for the most concentrated things in our lives, sleeping skins, caribou skins for parkas, caribou leggings for mucklucks, the sinew from the back for sewing for thread, and antlers for handles, and etc. I'll explain a little more about that here in a minute. So as I'm 56, so I've got a half century of watching this country change, and in those years, the vegetation has gotten much taller, bigger. The willows, the alders, the spruce are bigger. There's more spruce growing everywhere, and the caribou are still coming through that country, but they're experiencing a different country, basically. So this is the Western Arctic herd, or a little tiny piece of it. In early July, they aggregate, and they're basically getting as close together as they can to limit bug exposure, mosquitoes and bot flies and warble flies and gnats and no-see-ums and horse flies, and everything's feeding off this mass of animals. So here on the hill along the Kobuk River is where my parents settled in the early 60s, and a little bit to the right and up, you see a sort of a lump. That was our sod igloo. They built it in the ground in the old style, which is sort of dig a hole and lean some posts and beams and leaning boards up against it and pile moss on it. And then you've got a home with a tunnel to crawl in, and a log cache to keep your stuff in, to keep wolverines and mice and bears from stealing your stuff. And then in the foreground, you can see a so-called fish rack at this time of year, draped with caribou hides. And that was home. Pretty simple life, and small inside. You know, our inside our sod house was about 14 feet across the floor, and just about 6 feet high in the middle, and a tunnel to crawl out, and very cold floor. And if you stood up, you were warm, but if you sat down, you're cold. This is my family, parents and mom and dad and my older brother. So there's two of us kids, and I like to joke about everything, but especially suffering as a kid. My mom sewed our clothes and travel along the trail to the village, 25 or 30 miles away. It was a pretty arduous journey. Might take 2 days of my dad snowshoeing in front of the team, and there's these little kids that you have to try to keep warm. And so my mom sewed caribou skin mittens and hair in, so pretty utilitarian, fairly ugly, and not cool. And then sewed them without thumbs, so we wouldn't have cold thumbs. And then she sewed them to our sleeves so we couldn't get them off, or they wouldn't fall off. And so my joke now is that I know what it's like to have hooves, because you're so helpless tied in the sled and bundled up, and trying not to freeze to death on the way to the village. I want to read a little bit more about the Old Igloo here. So yeah, back then, with such small houses and you know, no electric lights and no radio, not much going on in your home besides you know, staying warm, cooking, telling stories, and if somebody had a book, it got shared up and down the river, and everybody read the same book. And so our sod igloo was small and low, the way sod homes were constructed for warmth. 12 or 14 feet across the floor, 6 feet tall in the middle at the highest point, and above us from the peeled poles of the ceiling hung horizontal rows of cotton string, blackened with dried blood. There my mom hung strips of caribou to dry. The meat darkened until it was ready to turn on the strings. When the strips were dry enough not to spoil, she'd stuff them into cloth flour sacks to store outside in our log cache. Then my dad would slice more for her to hang. All winter, meat hung drying. Bags and bags of dried caribou went into the cache for lunches all winter, and for shredding to make pemmican to eat on the trail, and for snacks all summer when there was no cold to keep meat and no caribou nearby to hunt. Tucked in where the small poles of the roof crossed the eave beam were long sheets of sinew peeled from the backs of bull caribou carcasses. Dried, they curled stiff and translucent and faintly yellow, ready to strip and use as thread for skin sewing projects. On our beds were caribou hides, soft and warm and giving off extra warmth and comfort in some nameless yet familiar way. Across the tunnel entrance to the outside world were more hides. And around our tiny home were household items made from caribou parts. Parkas and mucklucks and mittens, hide hinges, caribou skin wither stripping, antler handles on awls and knives and saws and pot lids. Cushions on the floor and stump seats were made from circles of thick-haired caribou hide sewn together, skin out. In the corner, hanging from a wooden peg, was our thermos in its huge fur tube, caribou hide sewn skin out into a sleeve as big around as a stovepipe for extra insulation during cold weather travel. The few store-bought items we owned were protected and used with care. Caribou skins were the one material we knew no dearth of. We could hardly imagine a life without all the caribou skins a person might need. The focus was so intense on the land and what it provided back then that everything was sort of decided by the season, the weather, the day. My parents never had jobs in my life. Well, my dad had a labor job for, maybe in the summer for short periods of time, but basically where we lived when we were home at the igloo, everything was decided by proximity of animals, season, day, weather. And so head out in the morning and see what the day's doing. And then that would decide whether you're going to haul wood or hunt caribou or set nets under the ice or whatever else, pick berries. And the so-called seasons of hunting set up by the outside world, moose season opens August 15th, etc., was a pretty foreign concept, as was a hunting license or rules. And so a lot of the idea of a rule was basically whether nature was going to get the better of you or not, and then what you needed as far as like, do you need caribou or do you not? You have plenty and do something else, haul wood or fish or something. And then each animal was sort of more classified in the time of year that it was good, fat, meat tasted good, or the fur was good or something like that. So in the course of my lifetime, of the many huge changes that have taken place, one of them is this mental outlook on hunting and value of skins, and then how outside laws fit in with that. Mixed in there with more change was I was born in 1965, so right about then was when snowmobiles sort of came to the Arctic and became this force that was equal in the amount of change it brought to the rifles in the 1800s. So snowmobiles arrived. Dogs were sort of, I'd like to say retired, but it's too kind of a word. They were just lost value, and dog teams sort of, to a large extent, ceased. And then snowmobiles required, instead of all this protein, they required dollar bills, and that put a bunch of different pressures into the situation. One being fur bearers were, when I was a kid, were kind of the only direct route to cash, salmon fishing, fur bearers, and then, some small amount of jobs, but not many. So as a 5-year-old, I guess I started trapping ermine and muskrats, and then kind of went from there. And my plans in life were to be a trapper and a hunter, and then, work towards, someday being Eskimo, Iñupiat, which, of course, didn't happen. And that the coming of all this modernity was out there, but seemed like it was far enough away that life was going to go on. So there along the Kobuk River, we were probably 8 or 10 miles from tree line, which is a great place to live, where there's spruce trees and salmon and bears and black bears and brown bears and caribou and moose and these trees that can provide firewood and building materials. And then a little bit further north was the pretty low windswept country that a lot less protection and different array of animals, but and in a way that tied in with my life too, because here we are living in what we called a sod igloo. But if you ran into outsiders or went to the lower 48, then you said the word igloo and you were immediately starting a long train of not communicating because people were thinking of a snow igloo, and that's further north where they didn't have as much building materials as we did. Same idea, same small structure, but so this was the super rich in my viewpoint, rich land and life that I lived as a kid, and then everything's been a continuum of change since then, and now we're facing all this desire for extraction of minerals on here in Caribou country, and then more technology. So anybody who is actually out hunting is on a magic carpet of airplanes and boats and snowmobiles and GPSs with fancy guns, and communication has been really hard on Caribou in the country too, because we can flash this information around, when a caribou spotted. And so somewhere in there is this viewpoint that I was born and raised with, this focus on the land and hunting and what it provides, and then just stirred into this big soup is modernity. In these past years, 20, I'd say 25, the climate change up there has gotten so intense. Northwest Alaska is kind of known as the ground zero for climate change, but it's gotten so intense that the sea ice will break up in the winter, or at times there's no sea ice in February, March, and right in the middle of winter when you expect the ocean to be frozen over. And trees are sprouting on the tundra in white spruce that you think of as not growing on the tundra. Alders are spreading up the mountainsides. Dwarf birch is this little shrub that you think of as being at ankle level on a caribou is now over our heads. And so we're dealing with all these very rapid changes in the environment. In the communities, because of influx of new things and money, there's this mix of the sort of old culture and then modern trucks and Alaska Airlines flights to Vegas and all this craziness. But then right outside of these small communities is that old wilderness that we interacted so much with in the past, and that's leading to basically turmoil and death, and people driving their trucks in a small town in storms when you shouldn't be driving your truck, and you can't even see the front of the truck, and people crossing rivers on their new high-speed snowmobiles when the ice is thin or dangerous now because it's not freezing. And so back to the analogy of this big stirred soup pot of old and new. I'm going to swap over to read a little bit about caribou in the winter. Winter is still the biggest, by far the biggest season there in my life. And even though summer has probably gotten to be about a month longer with this climate change. I'm going to try to find this real quick here. So this is part 2, winter. See if that can come through on the screen. Monica, tell me how, am I doing this right?
Yep. Yeah, we can see it perfectly.
Do you want me to stop sharing?
No, this is fine.
Okay, thanks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not a Zoom expert, so, okay, this is part 2. The morning is dark and cold. A huge frozen silence drapes the land, filling the valleys and the tundra's undulations and laying on soft pillows of snow under the skirts of spruce. The darkness stretches in all directions, motionless and still as far as the mountains and beyond. Overhead, the stars glitter, twinkling as if they watched last night, while the world, cloudless and unprotected, left the door open to outer space, and in the night that invisible spell poured down, cold. The cold of winter has returned. Summer buried the memory of winter until it was hard to even imagine, but now suddenly it is all so familiar. This cold that pinches like pliers, biting and merciless and dangerous. The air is harsh, brittle, and dry and searing, with most molecules of moisture wrung from it, condensed into frost. No insect exists in all the atmosphere of this world. The billion birds of summer have gone south. The few avian residents that remain have hidden in secret places, with feathers puffed against the long bitter night, surviving or not. Morning continues on, dark, still, with the temperature continuing to drop. Finally, faintly, the southern edge of the sky begins to brighten. The day is awakening, building a tiny fire beyond the horizon. Slowly, the fire catches and throws a small orange and blue glow. Distant hills take shape, black against the dawn. The blue and orange begin to melt the blackness around the stars. Snowdrifts glow on the river ice, a suffocated blue. The land lightens, and in the north, a purple curtain hangs above the horizon. The snow becomes a fairyland frosted in pale pink and purple and blue icing, and far to the south above the horizon, where the sun is hidden, thin wispy clouds burn golden flames like tiny commuting dragons. The first rays of sun paint the mountaintops pink. The nearby tundra remains in shadow. Up on a ridge, a line of knobby tracks catches light, whiter than the surrounding blue-gray, an old wind-blown wolf trail that wanders to the skyline. Wind-blown tussocks are 1,000 dark heads where grass shows through the snow, with 1,000 white drifts in the lee and light reflecting off each scalloped surface. Far across the fling of tundra, stray scattered willows and clumps of alders dot the landscape, waiting in otherworldly silence, their branches brittle and bundled with frost. A puff of fog floats in the air and one of the clumps moves. Dots take shape. It's a small group of caribou. A few of the animals are standing, feeding. Nearby, others are lying down, resting where they last fed. Their faces and flanks are frosty, their heads up and eyes watchful, watching for danger and watching this winter day arrive, as if they too are breathing in the beauty of this morning. A chip of sun is up now, beaming thin red rays that bathe the land in glowing light and shadows. The sun inches along behind the horizon, but can climb no higher. I hope you can't hear that rooster. A lone bull caribou rises, more follow in front, unfolding their front legs stiffly. They stand scanning the tundra, alert and picking apart the landscape for possible predators. Finally, a bull begins to feed. Others follow, pawing at the snow with their front hooves and stepping forwards to eye the exposed vegetation for the lichens they favor, quickly biting off the plants with the teeth of their bottom jaws, pressing against their palate on top. The curved outer shells of their hooves have changed since fall and grown longer and harder and sharper to better break through hard drifts and layers of ice. Their eyes detect a broader spectrum of light than other animals on the tundra, including ultraviolet light, which helps highlight the lichens against the white snow. The caribou swallow the food without chewing. Almost rhythmically, a front hoof moves more snow aside. More vegetation is scanned, torn free, and swallowed. Beside the feeding animals, others lie comfortably in the cold, ruminating, regurgitating, and chewing the tough plants they swallowed earlier, grinding them into fine paste with their back teeth. Calves lie near their mothers with their forelegs folded under their chests, patient, wide-eyed, and trusting, experiencing this, their first journey from birth in summer sun and now into the depth of winter darkness. I guess I brought up a little earlier the subject of ice. We don't have roads up in northern Alaska where I'm from, or one or two that go 1 or 2 miles, but not connecting communities. And so we travel on the ice, and as climate changes come, ice has become more unpredictable, more dangerous, and then it's hard to say when, especially in the fall, that ice is going to form. And so our spring breakups are fairly close to what they've been my entire life. And the river ice goes out in May and the sea ice goes out in late May or June. But the fall just drags on sometimes a month or 6 weeks into winter. The lack of ice, the so-called freeze up, is much later and much more dangerous. This is the sea ice near Kotzebue Sound and in Kotzebue Sound, and at times it's wide open now, which is allowing a lot more moisture into the atmosphere and creating a lot more storms in winter with more snow and sometimes rain. We're not prepared for rain in the Arctic. It's a very dangerous thing. This photo here, I'm not sure if it's showing through with on your screens clear enough, but these are caribou grazing on the tundra. I thought I was on the sea ice, and then I saw these caribou were feeding, not just on ice, and that's sort of the epitome of the Arctic, is this wind-blown white frozen land in the winter, and then come summer it's green and full of bugs and birds, and that huge mood change of Mother Nature provides the food that keeps all these animals going. When we do get rain in winter, back to the previous photo, but when we do get rain in winter, it forms these sheets of ice on the snow, and then the moose and musk ox, caribou, and other animals can't get down through that layer to feed, and that could be one of the reasons why the Western Arctic herd population has dropped so drastically in the last 10-15 years. This is the Kobuk River, and not the whole river. It's a very big river there, and looking out from where I was born and raised. And so I've never had a TV in my life, but this has been my TV, is staying home and watching caribou cross in the spring. And some of these springs within sight of the house, there's been 40 or 50,000 caribou crossing over the course of 3 to 4 weeks. These are some of the ones with the bigger antlers are bulls, but leading the herd in both directions is usually the the females. And so at this time of year, the females go first, and they're away, and this is May, and they cover all that ground very rapidly, and with just the worst conditions of falling through the ice and thin ice and soft snow, and then now with climate change, these endless bogs of alders and willows that have grown up very tall and big and thick and full of soft snow and slush and water. And so these caribou that I spend time watching, and at the same time I'm at home, so I'm trying to peel logs or write or get something done and not just stare at caribou all the time, which is hard not to. So these caribou will wait for usually a cow to brave the crossing, and she'll lead them into the water and climb up onto the center ice and cross that ice, and then swim another moat and be almost to the North Shore, which is about 600 yards. The river's about a quarter mile or so wide there. And then a willow will melt out and spring up, or a eagle will fly over, or whatever, and they all flee all the way back through this terrifying array of melting ice and climb out on the shore and start again. And so while it's amazing to watch them, it's also can be frustrating for their efforts. Here you can see them climbing out on the ice. They're experts at doing that, but if you watch these two on the ice, one of them is hurt. If you hunt at this time of year, you see any time of year with caribou, you see a lot of bruises and damage and bites, and pretty much every day of their life is an incredibly arduous experience. And I can never stop being amazed at how I want to use the word good-natured. I don't know if they're good-natured, but from my perspective, they're very accepting of a very hard life. This one has sound. I'm not a videographer, but hopefully it'll cover up the sound of this rooster here in the yard. I welcome questions at any time. I'm going to read one more section here. Actually, I'm going to wait just a little bit longer. So this is that last picture was mid-May or late May, and they're crossing there on the Kobuk, where I've spent most of my life. And then this is the open tundra north of the Brooks Range, where the Utakak Highlands, where these this herd has its losing my brain here, is calving grounds, which is where the cows are rushing to get to, where they kind of spread out, but they're all in the same area, and have their calves in the first week of June. And you can see on the mom there the bumps of warbles under her skin. You can see she's got hard antlers, which the cows are the last ones to drop their antlers for the year and then start regrowing them. The pregnant cows. And then these calves here, this calf here is, an hour or 2 or 3 or 4 old. And that's one of the amazing things about caribou is they have this mass birthing, and then they tell their kids, get your stuff, let's go. And they have to head out across this knobby tundra, which is basically like walking on bowling balls, and it goes on forever. And when it does end, they get to raging rivers or bears or snowfields or mountains. And so this calf that's an hour or a day old is heading out to navigate some of the roughest terrain there is. I guess my amazement and speculation is sort of how long it takes humans to get their kids so they're able to head out in the world. And it seems a little dangerous how long it takes us as this large mammal compared to these caribou that are so quick to be ready to survive in their natural landscape there. Meanwhile, everybody's wanting to have fresh caribou. All these populations are greatly dependent on the caribou. The bears now we're having more salmon because of these less cold winters. The streams are not freezing to the bottom as much, and berry populations, blueberry population crops for bears and stuff are kind of fluctuating. Salmon are fluctuating, but by and large more. But sort of behind the scenes there is the caribou is this sort of basically food supply for a lot of things. And so as the caribou go, many of these animals are ravens and wolves, everything's sort of contingent on that. And so I guess in the process of writing this book, I was hoping that people far away would care about caribou and keep an eye on what they could do to protect the Arctic and the Brooks Range, and as if it belongs to all of us. But then if you can get that out of your brain and just use caribou for analogy of caring about whatever happens to be the nature nearest wherever you live. I'm hoping this book doesn't just get people thinking about somebody else's nature, but their own what's close to them. I'm having a terrible time with the sun here coming out. I don't really want to complain because at home there's not going to be much when I get there. But if you guys can see this photo, it's kind of an important one to me. In the top right, you can see the logs of my dad's log cache, which he built when I was 1 or 2 there on the hill. And there's him in the red plaid shirt under it, and his friends that went north with him in the 60s. And that tundra is behind our house. It's still there, and it's not like that anymore. So this is probably 20 years later. You can see the cache and in wintertime, so terrible storms and a lot of blowing snow and drifts. But this is that same tundra. This is my daughter, and so this is probably I'm 56, so this is probably 40 years from when my dad built that cache. The same tundra that I showed you, could see animals coming, the animals could see where they were going. And this is my daughter, and towering above her head is spruce trees, but also dwarf birch, which are not supposed to tower above your head. And this already, this photo here is right behind the house there, and is probably even now it's probably 15-year-old photo. So 15 more years of growth have taken place since then. I'm going to back up for a second here if I can. Why can't I? Well, you're going to have to back up in your own brains. I feel like I'm seeing a piece of that picture. Monica, which picture are you seeing?
Yeah, it looks like it's loading, just maybe taking a minute. There we go. We're back here. So
yeah, so disconcerting to me that the sun's making so I can't see my slides. But so this is that tundra in the mid to late 60s, that looking north, and then this is looking north now. Just the sheer growth and change. So I guess one perspective is like, oh, vegetation is good, it's soaking up carbon dioxide, but it's not quite that simple there. And so what we've had as the permafrost has melted is these crazy fluctuations in the what the vegetation is doing. And probably 10 years ago now, one fall, there were so many blueberries you could hardly think straight on the tundra for just thousands of square miles of blueberries. And then the next fall, my daughter and I, we saw one blueberry. We think it was the same one. In our, walking the tundra, and the blueberries had basically the permafrost under their roots is melting, releasing all sorts of different fertilizer and whatever else they need to grow. And then the next year, I started seeing crazy Labrador tea growth. And now I'm convinced that that's what's going to take over the world. And so each one of these different species is dealing with crazy fluctuations in water and temperature and food supply. Meanwhile, just physically, the land is falling apart. The permafrost is just crumbling. This is the Arctic coast there by Kotzebue Sound, the Baldwin Peninsula, and tons of sloughing of permafrost. But then if you go inland, the rivers are changing color as minerals are leaching into the water. Same thing, melting soil. And then many of the lakes are so-called thermal karst lakes, which is basically like a swimming pool with a concrete, but in this case it was permafrost. And then as that melts, these lakes will they call it catastrophic drainage, but they just basically overnight vanish. And so there's lakes that I used to hunt otter and geese on, and now they're just grass fields, and more lakes are doing that. These musk oxen, same as caribou, are very it's very important to them to have dry snow, cold winters. They're incredibly good at surviving cold, but have a very hard time with rain and warmer weather. If you can see these two musk ox here, if you look carefully behind their hump there's the saddle of their back, there's no hair. You can see their backbone and skin. So they've gotten this, I think it's called range rot. I talked to some different veterinarians about it, but it's too wet in the winter, and they're getting this mange and losing their hair. And then they're in 30, 40, 50 below stormy weather with their skin exposed. And normally these animals have this crazy loft of Kibute insulation and fur, and they just don't get cold. And just another one of the countless effects of climate change there. So I'm going to halt here for a second before I get into the joys of caribou running into modern things here. I'm going to read chapter 4. It's called Being Lucky. Monica, how am I doing on time?
We're good.
That's quite an answer. Thank you.
7:53. Yep.
Okay. In Kobuk Village in August 2016, during a rainy spell, Nina Harvey and her sister Mildred Black invited me and my friend Diana in for boiled moose bones. Nina and Mildred are Iñupiat elders, both in their 80s, and they haven't exactly lived lives of leisure. Nina's is a modern government-built house with a kitchen bright and cheerful with fluorescent lights, a fridge, and a sink with hot and cold running water. They shouted approval when we came through the door. The sisters were sitting across the table from each other in straight back chairs, old ladies, small and hunched low behind their plates, smiling over huge steaming bones. Nina gestured toward the stove, and they were pleased when we quickly took plates and moved toward the stove to peer into the soup pot. Right away, I spotted sawed leg bones with big circles of fat marrow. My mouth started watering, and I forked a knee joint out, being careful the big bone didn't slide off my plate. I reached for my sheath knife and glanced around for salt. Mildred is a good storyteller. As she cut at meat and fat, chewing and talking, she told about her and Nina as girls growing up at the mouth of the Manilik River. Diana and I chewed and listened. Nina mentioned the recent rain, which had interrupted berry picking and caused the ladies to cease seining for whitefish. We all lamented how tall the willows and alders are growing nowadays, so thick in places that we can't spot animals and can hardly recognize known spots along the shores of the river. Mildred is tiny and incredibly stooped. Nina is wiry and agile, constantly moving. Their conversation meandered back and forth to the fact that no caribou had come yet this fall, wolves were plentiful, Young people don't fish enough anymore. They watch too much TV and drink and do drugs and don't know how to survive. They're going to starve when hard times come again. They need to know how to fish. I listened to the concerned old women, noting that Mildred used the word when and not if, talking about hungry times coming. I cut at my moose bone, wishing now that I'd chosen one with a little meat on it, not just all fat and cartilage. I enjoy Mildred's stories, and I gently steered her back upriver, back in time, asking, when you were kids, when did you first see a moose? She told a tale of no moose in the country, back in the 40s, and how one day her uncle got a strange dark animal, a moose. One fun part about Mildred's stories is that nearly everything that took place more than 15 or 20 years ago, she refers to as back in the 40s. Once you accept that as a catch-all phrase, not an actual date, you can't help smiling each time she says it and marveling at the cool way that so many seasons have settled in her mind like fallen leaves. Her statement about moose and their uncle fit with what I was pondering. Basically, had moose been here since time immemorial, or had they arrived relatively recently, as they had around Kotzebue? To me, their recent arrivals suggested that vegetation, willows and other shrubs, had been increasing steadily here, even back in the 40s. From there, my thoughts scattered, wading through what we've been experiencing here in Northwest Alaska. Much warmer falls and winters, so warm that we have rain blizzards in winter now, and changes in wind, water, and ice and weather patterns, changes especially in the rapid overgrowth of vegetation, changes in the movement of animals, drastic changes in us humans too, unimaginable if viewed from the recent past. And yet we still hold on to uncertain connections to the land, hunting and fishing and gathering. It was late August, and not surprisingly, my mind moved to caribou, arguably still the most important animal to most local people, regardless of the inroads made by boxes of technology flooding north. The X boxes and the Amazon boxes, the manufactured homes and steel shipping containers, the boxes of Pampers and cases of Pepsi, TVs and telephones and all the rest. For a minute, I chewed and cut at my big bone. In my cluttered head, I was sifting through buried accounts I'd read of the early 1900s along the Kobuk River. The starvation and suffering, the diseases, and the dearth of caribou in the years following the crash of the herds in the late 1800s. What about caribou? I finally asked Nina and Mildred. When did you first see those? I'm shy, especially around elders. Over the years, I've mostly kept my 1,000 questions to myself. Like many members of the younger generations here, I'm deeply embarrassed by my lack of knowledge, by the huge and obvious gaping holes in what I know about the land and animals, and the Iñupiat place names and proper seasons for gathering this or that. For example, which species of whitefish to preserve when and in which way. And lately, all of that is made worse by the fact that I'm white. And why am I asking? What am I planning to do with their traditional knowledge? My eyes stayed down on my knife as I carved at another bite of tasty fat. The moose was fresh and so good, a young bull. Were there caribou around when you were kids? I murmured. At times, Nina can't hear too well, but Mildred can hear and think and remember just fine. Instead of answering directly, she did that beautiful thing that elders often do. She began to tell a story. In this case, the story was about her as a seven-year-old back in the 40s, when as girls they first saw a caribou. The men had all gone hunting, searching for small game or whatever they could find. They left the women to tend camp. A lone animal with antlers showed up on the sandbar below their camp. The women had a 22 rifle and one bullet. An older sister took the gun and the bullet, and she moved quietly downriver through the brush. After a long while, the girls and the women in camp heard a tiny distant report from a rifle. They rushed to grab their ulus, Iñupiat knives. They hurried along the shore. As they came out of the brush at the upper end of a sandbar, they could see their sister. Lying near her on the sand was an animal they had never seen before. It was large and very dark, with a rounded stomach and chest and large black furry antlers. The hooves were black and the legs and flanks dark with short summer hair. The women and girls had never worked on a caribou, but of course they cut it up and hauled the meat back to camp. Sitting at the table, I wondered if that animal had been a lone stray or had that marked the beginning of caribou returning in larger numbers to this country. I kept my question to myself. In this region, asking too many questions is often considered bothersome and definitely white. I couldn't help smiling though and asking, what did the men say when they got home? Mildred and Nina glanced up. The two old ladies grinned and shared a glance over their moose bones. Lucky, Mildred said. They laughed happily, and then we all laughed again, in part because of how one word so perfectly sums up the complexities, effort, and uncertainty involved in finding food on a hungry land. The telephone rang shrilly right then. Nina leapt up to answer it. Mail plane coming, she shouted. Raven, 15 minutes out. The old days faded from the room. Now suddenly back in the present with the plane to catch, I glanced at my backpack and boots by the door. I wiped the fat off my knife onto my finger and licked my finger, sheathed the knife, and quickly checked the time on my iPhone. Still, I could see that bull caribou dark on the sandbar. I could see the knobby knees and black hooves, the soft black velvet antlers, and the animal's dark, thin summer coat. And on the sand beside the caribou, a bright pool of coagulated blood, with flies buzzing and gnats and mosquitoes biting, frenzied over the smell of so much blood, and the soft green summer leaves on the willows fluttering in a warm breeze, and the quiet current of the river flowing past. And I could see how lucky I've been to have lived here all the seasons with caribou flowing through my life. And for a few more moments, I sat at Nina's table, comforted to remain lost in the years, to picture the continuous stream of food, the thousands and thousands of meals these two sisters and I too have harvested from this land. Thank you. Back to caribou. So this photo that I left on the screen is the migration arriving across the ice, coming straight to the town of Kotzebue on the western Arctic coast. The Kotzebue is a hub town, about 3,000 people serving 10 villages, I guess. So there's plenty of hunters there, and there's a huge emphasis on hunting. And nowadays people use snowmobiles and other vehicles for getting out in the country. There's by and large the guns have switched to people use semi-automatic guns. Here you can see people using trucks on the ice and telephones, iPhones, and Facebook, and so all this is mixed in with the old culture of huge emphasis on hunting and gathering and bringing something home. Here in this picture, you can see my friend Andrew. He sewed those, he hunts seals, so he sewed those sealskin pants. He's got other nylon overpants at home too. But the white windbreaker is a Northern Outfitter windbreaker ordered from Florida, and the AR-15, most of us know what those are, and the goggles and and then snowmobile nowadays, and then many of us have switched to plastic sleds instead of hardwood sleds, and well, he's wearing a beaver hat, which is standard old style, but a lot of inroads of technology mixed with the old emphasis on hunting. Nowadays, you see a lot of emphasis on getting caribou for meat. I'm seeing very few people sleeping on caribou hides nowadays, whether they're camping or their homes, and legs are seldom saved for mucklucks anymore. And so there's a lot of pieces missing, but still a cultural emphasis on the land. Hunting practices tend to take this new technology and use whatever you can, while once again the viewpoint of getting the animals is strong, hasn't diminished that much. So that's led to a lot of user conflict, and then potentially the herd. There's many reasons why the herd might be dropping drastically right now. I just wrote some op-eds in some newspapers about this subject, which is unfortunately, like many other things in our life, seems to instantly be more and more politicized, as opposed to looking at the issues. But that's where we're at. Meanwhile, this is hard for me to see with this screen right now, but this is Red Dog Mine up there in Northwest Alaska, and that's what we're facing now, is more and more emphasis on turning this region of Alaska into a resource extraction on a large scale, and the Ambler Road, which I'm trying to bring awareness to the lower 488 of this mega project, where they want to build a spur road off of the pipeline road and head into this country where I was born and raised, and start turning it into a bunch of open pit copper and lead and zinc and other mines. Meanwhile, we're having more all the effects of climate change. I mentioned the permafrost melting, but also more tundra fires and forest fires and drought, and more streams that are becoming turbulent and laced with minerals that are leaching out of melting riverbanks, and all sorts of upheaval coming all at once, which I spent a certain amount of energy in early 2000s talking in the lower 48 in Canada about climate change and trying to warn about it. And it was incredibly embarrassing. Here I am shouting about willows are really growing fast, and nobody really cares. So I'm suspecting now that fires are sweeping through the lower 48 more, that the subject of climate change might not be as hard to bring awareness of. And the long list of things that caribou deal with, these are bot flies that grow in the larvae that grow in their throats. On their back are the warble flies, this insect's cousin. So these flies have a incredibly ingenious system of daycare, where they lay eggs in July on the fur, the nose, and the legs of the caribou, and the eggs hatch out and crawl up and burrow into the animal, either the sinuses or the under the skin, and then spend the next 11 months riding in this nice, warm, well-fed place in the animal. A friend of mine who I chartered to fly me over the herd, some of these pictures you see earlier, large concentrations of caribou, he was flying me over it. When we got back, the plane looked like somebody had been shooting at us with a paintball gun, and those are the masses of insects that are hovering over the large groups of caribou, sometimes 80 or 100,000 caribou in a group. And as each year, as we have less cold weather, more insects are surviving and more new insects are moving in. The tundra, meanwhile, is melting and beginning to look a little bit more like the moon in these changing patterns of alder growth, which looks like some sort of rash on the tundra, and then melting pockets where the permafrost melts, forms a pool of water which collects heat from the sun and then makes this little ring of growth around it. So back to the sad analogy of everything melting and falling apart. What I'm seeing more and more of is the caribou, of course, have to deal with all of this. Thin ice and melting ice at different seasons, and more insects and more dwarf birch, more vegetation. And I see a certain amount of caribou getting marooned on the ice and then just swept out. But meanwhile, they keep coming, and they keep doing what they do.
Hey, Seth, we've got a number of questions. So I'm wondering, I don't know how many photos you have left, but we're running a little tight on time now.
Yeah, so basically,
Questions?
I'm at the end of my slideshow.
Okay.
I'm thrilled to take questions. That's usually the best part. Yeah.
Yeah, let me turn it over to really quick here. Awesome, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Ariel really quick. I'm going to get my questions organized. Ariel's going to share a little bit about how you can help, and then I will we'll start fielding all these great questions you have, and please feel free to put more in the chat in the meantime.
Okay, sounds great. Yeah, I'm hoping that you'll switch it back, or maybe
Yep, we will as soon as Ariel's done. Yep.
Sounds good. Yeah. So yeah, the last couple slides there, while you're getting your work done, there was one of the things that we're seeing is as caribou come later, then the bulls are in rut, which means the meat's not desirable. So more people are shooting cows with calves or without calves, and so you'll see these calves with camped out next to the head and gut pile of their mom, and so all these little changes. I guess maybe it's harder to see from a distance, but when you live close to the land and you're counting on the land for food and stuff, each little change is sort of exponentially more obvious to. I don't want to take extra credit, but it's just the lifestyle that when you're living close to the land.
Okay, Ariel.
All right. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to just explain how you can get more involved with Alaska Wilderness League. So first of all is to take action. So right now there is a proposed plan called the Willow Plan, which would expand drilling in the Western Arctic. And with climate change posing such an immense threat to our planet, any additional oil drilling would cause additional threats. And also it would really threaten the landscapes of the Western Arctic. So right now we are asking you to take action by urging the Biden administration to leave the remaining fossil fuels in the ground. And so you can follow the link on the slide, and Lois is going to put it in the chat in order to tell the Biden administration to shut down the Willow Plan once and for all. The second way to get involved is to make a donation. In order to become a member of the league, you need to make a donation. And I see so many members on the call with us today. Thank you so much for being here and for being a member. For those of you who are not yet members, I hope that you will consider joining us in order to support our work across Wild Alaska in order to protect these really important lands. For those of us who are already members, I hope that you will make an additional donation today in honor of programs like this that we use to educate people and also to engage our members and share a little bit more and engage with you and let you know more about what we're working on. And finally is to follow us on social media. I've put all of our social media handles right there, and Lois will also put them in the chat. I know that I really love following us on Instagram in order to have a fun little break in my feed of the beautiful places in Alaska. And following us will allow you to stay up to date with petitions and actions that we're asking our members to take part in, as well as matching gift opportunities, which will allow you to make your gift go further, as well as the latest news on Wild Alaska, and finally, fun facts about wildlife in Alaska. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you to Seth for all of the interesting facts and everything you've shared, and turn it over to you and Monica for questions.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Ariel. Yeah, and I just wanted to remind everyone too, in addition to those items, you know, you got to hear such an amazing kind of glimpse into Seth's new book, 1,000 Trails Home. So we will be including a link in the email tomorrow if you are looking to purchase a copy. And there is a way, I know because Seth and I were talking yesterday, you can even get a signed copy. So we'll have all that information in the email if you just need to read the book in its entirety. And I did see a lot of accolades coming through on the chat of people that had gotten to read it. So big theme, obviously, with some of the questions was climate change. I did have a few that I thought we could start off with that actually just touched a little bit more on the homesteading aspect. And part of that was how did, you know, why did your parents choose to go there? And then there was one about where you went to school.
Oh, okay. So my parents were both from Ohio originally. My dad, Toledo, and went to Catholic school and loved nature, but was confined by that schooling and Toledo. And so as a 17-year-old went to the territory of Alaska, ended up going to college in, you know, it was called College Alaska then. My mom went up to the college in the, I want to say 1960. They basically had 2 or 3 women there, and they were giving reduced or free tuition to get some women to come to their college. They met there, and then my dad had worked on the North Slope with Caribou, and was interested in the, well, basically really interested in the old Iñupiat lifestyle. And so they went up to the Kobuk there. And I think there's a certain amount of coincidence that they were sort of just a few miles from Onion Portage, the maybe #1 caribou crossing place in the world. That's how they got there. The whole idea of building a sod house was part of their incredible interest in old ways, native ways, how the locals did it, especially my dad. My mom, I think, was probably less interested in those things. At that point, a certain amount of the local people were kind of enamored and interested in new ways and new things. And so we were, as a family, were facing backwards, if you want to call it that. Schooling, the state of Alaska back then had what was called the centralized correspondence program, because a lot of people did live out and away from places. And so in the fall, they would send 2 boxes for each of us 2 kids. One was the good box with fun stuff like rubber bands and pencils and stuff, and the other one was the box with blank lined paper and books. And so my mom taught us all those years. And I did have a few bouts with public school, once when I was 15 and once when I was 9, but otherwise it was all homeschool. And I'll say just one other thing is that we didn't follow the syllabus. We fished for dogs under, in the fall for drying fish, and we hunted caribou, and then we fished under the ice for dogs. And then when the ice got too thick, and that would usually be November, we would start our schoolwork. And we only did it at night, because during the day we were cutting wood and running dogs and trapping. And so after dinner at night, 7 days a week, 3 hours a night, maybe, it wasn't timed, of course, we would do our work. And we tried to get the whole year done in 3 months, basically before the sun turned yellow and it's before the sun came back.
Wow. Yeah, the question had spoken to me a little bit too, because just the way you talked about the the environment dictating, your day-to-day, dictating just essentially what you're doing and the learning from it. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense that obviously the books would have to take a second seat to survival and your, I'm sure, lengthy to-do list.
Yeah, that was totally true. And it's real interesting nowadays because, our excitement was reading books. And, you hear all this talk nowadays about, oh, your kids should read books. Well, we certainly didn't have any friends around or anything. There's no other human structures to go visit or any of that stuff. So my brother and I loved reading, and that's what we wanted to do. When we got done with our schoolwork, we threw the schoolwork in the corner and grabbed our books.
Amazing. A big theme both in this presentation and your book is really this tension between kind of the traditional and then modernity, as you referenced a number of times, and really seeing how that plays out with especially all the changes coming through the climate change that's being seen in Alaska. We mentioned a lot, Alaska, especially the Arctic, kind of being the center of this, really on the front lines of climate change. And I think you really expressed how that's playing out on the ground. So I had a question for you. When you were talking about your time with Mildred and the stories that she was saying, I really appreciated that everything was just back in the 40s, kind of irregardless of when it happened. But how important do you find what's happening now with the climate and the changes and this traditional knowledge that's held that can really help illustrate? And do you find that it's being respected or captured in the right ways?
Interesting. That's a complex question. I think there's too much emphasis on that. I think there's too much emphasis on the scientists coming in and studying and flying around with helicopters to study what we already know. And then I think there's also too much emphasis on turning to the elders and asking them some questions, because we're beating around the bush. We don't want to acknowledge that what we're doing is wrong. We don't get that much from the elders have been watching this for a long time, and the elders that we have now are kind of my age. They're not. A lot of people have died out. The respected elders that I grew up with, and so yeah, I don't follow that as much as the emphasis put on it. When these people come in and ask these questions, the so-called elders, like older than me, but they're beating around the bush to answer what these outsiders want. What are they asking? And it's a lot of this we already know. We just don't want to acknowledge it. We're doing the wrong stuff, and we're trying to figure out a way of not changing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with that change, there were a couple of questions regarding the shifts in predators. And so I know something you touched on is, these changes can impact the migration routes and everything. And what have you seen or experienced with that on the predator side as well?
A lot of that's pretty interesting. When I was a kid, there was a bounty on wolves. And it was also right after snowmobiles arrived. So to be a wolf then was really tough. People chased down every wolf they saw, and the bounty was I can't remember whether it was $50 or $100 for the one paw, and then the skins were pretty valuable too. And so now a wolf skin's not worth very much, relatively speaking, compared to the amount of other sources of money. And wolves there's a lot right now. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. When I was a kid, there was a lot of black bears and fewer grizzly bears, and now it's really hard to see a black bear, and grizzly bears are everywhere, and potentially especially hard on moose populations and caribou too. And so the mood swings of the predators take place fairly rapidly. It's not mood, it's just me saying mood, but the populations take place fairly rapidly, and then that emphasis of humans all the way from long ago to when the whalers came to in my young life, that emphasis on trapping furs really pushed back against the overgrowth of certain populations of predators. So all that to me feels like it's incredibly in flux right now. Not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, nature's going to do what it's going to do, but everything is, there's so much flux right now.
Yep. Good friend Michael Boardman, who also did a geography of hope for us, put a question in the chat regarding your thoughts on the viability of the Western caribou herd. And so I just wanted to quickly let folks know, you've heard us talk a lot about the porcupine caribou herd. That's when you find in the east. There's also a central caribou herd, and then there is the Western Arctic caribou herd. So there's three main caribou herds in kind of Arctic Alaska as a whole. So just trying to clarify. So, you know, you've talked all these changes. You've mentioned the decline in numbers. So what's your feeling? What's your sense there in terms of the viability?
Well, before I forget, there was one other herd there, Teshekpuk herd, smaller, but right there in the mix, right around Barrow, right in the mix of a lot of drilling and close proximity to a larger town, Barrow or Iñupiat. Yeah, the country's huge up there, so I trust the nature to be good at what it does. I wouldn't be surprised if this herd stops migrating down to where a lot of us live because it's just too dangerous. So I expect lots of politics, lots of fighting over who gets to shoot these caribou, and then potential losses in this herd, but I don't see it dying out. I feel like these caribou are so good at what they do, and it's such a huge country. It's just we might not be the lucky people we've been.
Yeah, and it's a great point to raise. When we're talking the Western Arctic, it's not the area that the league focuses on is the National Petroleum Reserve, Alaska. It's part of the Western Arctic. It's the size of about Indiana, but the herd encompasses and covers so much more in their migratory route. It's way beyond that, and it hits so many of these villages outside of that area. So it is kind of mind-boggling to think that the amount of kind of scale that these herds need or currently use.
Yeah, and the sad part is technology and communication and the ability to travel and communicate, because that's word gets on Facebook of somebody spotting caribou and it just goes everywhere, and then boats launch and whatever, and it'll be interesting to see what technology comes our way too. That's a tough thing for a caribou.
Looking here, there was a question when you mentioned the rain occurring more frequently in the winter and how significantly that can really affect the animals and the landscape and the people. Clarifying, and I didn't want to assume, but you said it can create problems for a number of reasons. With the ice layer, it can make travel difficult for essentially everyone, animals and residents, people alike, but also made the ability for, especially caribou or other animals to acquire food more difficult because of that ice layer. Is that correct? Yeah,
that's correct. And one of the analogies I use is if you, I don't know where you live, but if you woke up one morning and all the roads had melted, your life would be pretty different. And then if you were waiting around in the fall hoping your roads came back, never knowing if they were, and then everybody knowing somebody whose uncle, cousin, sister, auntie drowned falling through the road on a regular basis, and a pretty small number of people live here, and so yeah, that as far as the human side of things. And then out there are these animals dealing with the same thing without the support of technology and whatever else we've got going. We've had some what we call good winters for a few years now, but 5 or 6 years ago, we had pouring rains every month, which is just incredibly demoralizing as far as we're used to powder snow where our clothing is set up for for soft snow or hard snow, but not dry snow. And then houses and wood piles and vehicles.
Ooh. We'll give it a minute here, see if his connection returns. Well, possibly not. And I did have one last question. I was hoping that Seth would be able to leave us with some words of hope from his experiences out on the tundra. What I'm going to do, I'm going to email that to him and hopefully get a quote for him. And I'm going to include that in the email. So please check out the email tomorrow for Seth's hopeful words so that we can wrap up this geography of hope, and also being respectful of time, knowing that we've gone about an hour and a half now. But so grateful for all of you that have joined us this evening. It really was quite a wonderful experience to hear Seth's book in his own words and his experiences growing up in Western Arctic Alaska. And yeah, stay tuned in a few weeks for Stephen Kozlowski, and we hope to see y'all back then. Thanks.